Hello. I just pressed record and I feel happy. Hi, I'm Kaylee. This is Kaylee Cross Stitch, a channel where I talk about cross stitch. And today it's a Flosstube Extra because when you have a bad day at work, you do what you love. And I love cross stitch, so we're gonna do that. And I am going to see if I can explain to you how I planned my cross-stitch project, my lifetime project of stitching each of the United States, and how I decided what size fabric to stitch all of them on. So let me start from the beginning, shall I? I stitched a pattern of the United States. It was just, a map of the US. Each state was different. And then I stitched another one because I was like, ooh, that's cool. And then I thought, what would it be like if I had each state stitched on my wall? That would be cool. And as you do, you go on Etsy and you look for stuff, and I found this. From Stitches Lover's Shop, link is below. The Beautiful USA 50 in 1. And I put it in my favorites, and I waited, and it was on sale at one point, and I took the plunge. I bought it. 50 patterns for $50 is still a really good price. And I was like, wow, these are beautiful. Can't wait to stitch some of them. It's just really cool. It's just landscape pictures of the states. And so I got the patterns, and then I realized that the patterns are not to scale, meaning that all the states are similar size patterns. They have a similar stitch count, but all the states are not similar in size, right? And I was like, how am I going to do this? And this was fairly early on when I was discovering different count of fabric, like 14 count, 16 count, 18 count. If you don't know what those are, I recommend finding some YouTube channels and videos that are explaining what different count fabric means and how to get those. Some of the fabric that I'll talk about today is hard to find. Some of it is easy to find. So just so you know. So I was like, okay, if I want to stitch all the states, I want them to be to scale, because I kind of want them to be the size proportionate to each other. For example, I'm not going to show you the patterns, but I'm going to have them open so that I can reference them. So when I bought it, here's another tip. When I bought it, it came as a one PDF with all the states in it. So it's like 150 pages or something like that. There's about 3 pages per pattern, 2 or 3 pages per pattern. And then it also came with a PDF of multiple sheets per state. So it came with one sheet that is pattern keeper compatible, and then one that has, the standard size of pattern, and then you might have runoff on different pages. So I use the pattern keeper version, and that's what I'm using to stitch them with. So when I got my PDF, it was 150 pages, and I used the feature print to PDF. So because I own the PDF, I was able to save each state as its own pattern. So if you don't know how to do that, just Google print to PDF. And the important thing is when you're saving it as a PDF, you want to select the range of pages, and that's how you save a specific state as one PDF. Okay? Then I got myself a map of the United States. I printed it out. Let me see if I can adjust this a little bit for you. And I decided to figure out, okay, which count fabric should I put on all of them? Or which count fabric should I put each state on? how do I figure that out? Well, I found this cross-stitch gauge on Yarntree, and I'll link this as well to the Etsy shop that I got this from. And this is a gauge that shows you by inches and by centimeters down here, but actually it's by stitch count. So different fabrics are named, or their count sizes are based on how many stitches there are in an inch. Sorry for the rest of the world. America decided we needed to take over and not use the metric system for this. I don't know why. Maybe somebody can explain to me, one of my international friends, or maybe one of my US friends knows this too. So 11 count fabric has 11 stitches in an inch. 14 count fabric has 14 stitches in an inch. 16, so on, 18, 20. And I added 20 count in here because I know that 20 count fabric is available and I want to have that option. 22, 25, 28, 26. I actually have never purchased 26 count fabric. 28, 30, 32, 36, 40, and beyond? I don't know. That's part of what I'm discussing today. So I decided that the biggest states would be on 11 count, which is the biggest count that I have. Unless you do like 6 count. I've seen 10 count and 6 count, but I would spend a fortune on floss if that were the case. So I said, okay, I'm going to start with the biggest state, which is Texas. And I'm going to say that's going to be 11 count because the pattern is a little bigger than the others, but Texas is huge. Texas is huge. I wish I had Googled like European countries that are the size of US states or something, but just know that Texas is big. And so I said, okay, that's going to be 11 count. And then all of the other states are calculated based on Texas being 11 count. Okay, if you're doing a map of a different continent, you might decide differently based on the set of patterns that you have. But I thought, okay, since I have Texas is the biggest state, the pattern stitch count is 130 by 120, 130 by 120. So I'm just going to use that as my base and go from there. So how did I figure out what all the other states were going to be? Well, conveniently, all the western states have straight borders, and a lot of times they line up. So Texas, I said, okay, that's 11 count. And this small section right here, let me see if I can zoom you in a little bit better. Rip. This small section, or this small border right here, in Texas, it's 30 stitches wide. Yes, 30 stitches wide. And then I go to my Oklahoma pattern, and I say, okay, Oklahoma, where are you? This section in Oklahoma is 50 stitches wide. And I did other parts, but I did the border that made the most sense, that was shared between both states. Okay, so I said, okay, this is 50, this is 30. I take my stitch count. I know that Texas is stitched on 11 count, and I find my 30, about 30 stitches, and then I go down to see where 50 fits into that. Right here, 18 count. So this is 54, this is 33. And that's a similar spot. Okay, so I say, okay, Oklahoma's going to be 18 count. Put it there. And then I recorded what size each of these borders were based on stitch count. And then I just went through like all the states and figured them out. I have not gotten to some of these over here where the borders are not as easy to see. So I still need to finalize North Carolina. I need to figure out Virginia, but like which border am I going to figure that out from? And it gets a little tricky if you have a diagonal border because sometimes the patterns don't really match up. So I do have to figure out some of these eastern states before I continue. Or before I stitch them, I guess. So now when I did this, I was like, oh, the smallest I can go over 1 is on 28 count. So that was my smallest. So I need to double check those because your girl Kaylee has figured out that there are many different fabric sizes beyond 28 count. Smaller stitches. And I have started stitching over 1 on 32 count with DMC, with full cross. And I have stitched a couple things, or I started stitching a couple things half stitch with 40 count, which is really small. So my small states whose patterns are similar in size to the other states, I can stitch on teeny tiny fabric and it will be to scale, and I don't have to sacrifice the to scaleness of those patterns. Does that make sense? So let me show you the fruits of my labor. I started stitching these in a very random order. I don't really know why I stitched some of the things I did, but I started these in the fall of 2021. No, 2020. Fall of 2020. Time travels way too fast. And I started with Arizona because I thought this pattern was really pretty. B, I wanted to stitch on 16 count because I was only stitching on 18 count at this point. So I wanted to stitch on 16. And I was really interested in learning more about why Arizona voted the way it did in the 2020 US election. So my idea was, as I stitch each state, I'm going to learn about the state a little bit. And I did that with Arizona, and I kind of petered off, and maybe I'll get back to that and do that more. But yeah, so I stitched Arizona first, and it turned out really well. And I was like, ooh, this is actually kind of smaller than I expected the pattern to stitch up, but I like it. It's kind of cool. And I do have a couple videos of this on my Instagram if you want to see that. And then after Arizona, I wanted to stitch on 22 count because I ordered some of the fabric and I was like, oh, what's 22 count gonna be like? And I stitched Georgia. So this is stitched on 22 count based on my calculations from doing all this border work. 22 count. So I did one small pattern change. I outlined this in one of these blues, and I stitched this with one thread over 1. No, I don't need to get into that. So then I was worried. I was like, oh no, what if my calculations aren't very good, or they're faulty or something? And I decided to stitch Florida so I could see, especially with this little knob, see if that fit with my calculations. And with my calculations, Florida was on 11 count. So this has 8,000 stitches or something. Florida had 3,000. So Florida took much less time, and it's on 11 count. So let me see if I can fold this and show you. I believe I've done this before on my channel, but hey, some of you are new, and this is a specific video for this. So, not bad, eh? See, that'll fit in there nicely. If I ever figure out how I'm gonna finish these. So then Florida, look at this bad boy. These stitches are big, because they're 11 count stitches. So this is stitched with 3 strands over 1 full cross. 1 strand, 3 strands. So for all my 14 count and my 11 count, I'm going to use 3 strands. For all my 16, 18, 2 strands, 20, I was going to use 2, but I'm going to switch to 1, 20, 20, 22, 25, 28 count. Those will all be 1 strand. And who knows for the smaller count fabrics. I haven't gotten there yet. So then after I stitched Georgia, I was like, well, let me test the same thing, but to the west. And I stitched Alabama on 25 count. This is an easy grid, and it was my first time over 1 on 25 count, so it was really fun to practice that. We're getting a pile of states here. I'm bending poor Arizona. So then let me check this border. Let me see how this fits. So the patterns, you know, they're not going to match up perfectly, but it's not bad, right? At least it's the same size. Oh, that's where Alabama goes, right? How embarrassing would it be if I hadn't gotten these right? Okay, and then let's see if this is going to match up with Florida. See? Yes, girl. Okay, it worked. Right? So, you know, they're not going to match up perfectly, but that's how they match up. And my most recent finish is Iowa. This took me forever. And I think it's because I didn't like stitching with 2 strands on 20 count. That's all. So this is Iowa. I haven't stitched any of the borders or any of the states bordering Iowa, so we'll have to see. And I started stitching Iowa because I was in Iowa this summer, so I started it in Iowa. Iowa. How many times am I going to say Iowa? So I hope that makes sense. I hope that clarifies a little bit, you know, how I did this. And maybe I'll do an update about these ones over here and let you know how I came along and how it's going. Again, the link to the pattern set that I got will be in the description, and also the link to this cross stitch gauge will be in the description. Sorry for my light; it's taking that over. But this is really helpful, especially if you're interested in stitching on different count of fabric, and you'll see, you know, what the size comparison will be. Okay? Please let me know if you have any questions, any suggestions on how I should finish this project, because I thought about framing each of them, and then I was like, oh, if I'm gonna move, that's lots of frames, and what if I choose to, I don't know, what if I change my mind on what kind of frame I want, so that I buy 50 frames and then I don't want them. I thought about doing like a quilt. I thought about doing just like a hanging tapestry, but I don't know, man. Like sewing these together, especially if my calculations don't match up or the patterns don't match up, like it's gonna be a little weird. But I don't know. We'll see what I end up doing with the finished product. Maybe they'll just sit in a drawer. Wouldn't be anything new. Yeah, but let me know if you have any questions about this or any suggestions as to how I should finish it, and some ideas on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful to those of you who have been asking about this project. So I'll see you next time. Have a good one.